All right, I want you to do a little exercise with me, and this is not physical, so some of you, some relief right away. So we have a brain game. First of all, I want you to say the word silk 3 times. Now spell silk. Now say the word silk again 3 times. Now answer the question, what do cows drink? We're sort of all over the board there. At the far extreme, it's silk. That would be very wrong. Milk is also wrong, if you answered that. And I did hear a water somewhere, so someone was good to go. Well, there you go. If you're thinking about the baby cows, so yeah, there you go. The age was not specified. You know, I do that because it gets you to the point that you're expecting something, right? And then it's maybe not what you expected. And I did that because we are in Matthew chapter 20 today, and this whole chapter is full of things that people didn't expect. Certainly not the people in Jesus' day, and hopefully us, if we again can put ourselves there, if we can forget maybe, I've heard this over and over, put ourselves in that situation, we'll see how so much of that chapter is unexpected. And that in itself gives us a general lesson for the Christian life, a general lesson about the nature of the Christian life. But then there's a specific lesson that also comes out of chapter 20. It's the culmination of what started in chapter 18. You remember when the disciples are with Jesus and they ask him, hey, Jesus, who's the greatest? And they're talking about other people. They say, which one of us is the greatest? And Jesus doesn't answer their question. He doesn't say, oh, you. But he does address it. He says, you guys don't get what it means to be great. And he tells them in Matthew 18, verses 3 and 4, and it's on your handout, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So he surprises them. That's unexpected, what he says. And certainly when he adds this idea, to even get in the kingdom of heaven, you have to have this trait of the little children, and specifically says you have to be humble. You know, how is humble that important? Well, we said there's a couple elements to it. First of all, it's being aware of your limitations, of what you can and can't do, what you do and don't know. And that was a big problem for people in Jesus' day. They thought they knew something about the Messiah and the kingdom, and it turns out it wasn't right. They thought they could earn their way into this kingdom, and that certainly wasn't right. And so for us, we definitely need to know our limitations. That's how you come to accept grace, how you accept God through grace, is you realize, I can't do it on my own, God. I need you. So that's why he says you've got to be that way. And then the other side of humility that we've been seeing also is you have to put others first. Philippians 2 talks about that. In humility, value others above yourselves. Look to their interest, not just to yours. And so valuing others, putting others first. And we said last week, and that includes others would be God at the top of the list and other people. And so it brings in the greatest command. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Put others first. I mean, this is just foundational to the Christian life. And Jesus goes on then to talk about it in chapter 18 and 19. And everything he says to some degree is unexpected. It's not what people were planning. They'd ask him questions. He'd tell them stories. He'd say things. It didn't fit what they had in their mind, their common expectations about things. Well, here in chapter 20, both elements culminate. The unexpected element culminates. Everything in this chapter is just off the charts, unexpected. But also, Jesus, in talking about humility and putting others first, he takes it to a new level, a different level. You know, last week we said that the main idea last week was kingdom greatness. And just being a disciple requires putting others first. You know, humility includes putting others first. Being a disciple requires putting others first. Well, this week Jesus takes it to even another level. Our main idea is putting others first requires sacrifice. It requires sacrifice. When it comes down to it, we have to be willing to put them first to the point of even sacrificing something in and about ourselves. And, you know, whenever we get ready to look at a passage, we need to ask, I need to make it clear. How does this really affect us? I mean, maybe it's interesting history, but what's it mean for us right now today? Well, let me ask you, who here is in a relationship of any sort? Yeah, your hands should all be up. I'm not talking just marriage. I'm talking, do you have neighbors? Do you have coworkers? Do you have family members? Do you have friends? Are you at this church? Okay. Yes, we're all in a relationship. Well, think about it, as we talk about a relationship. Have you ever had any problems in a relationship? Ever? If you can really think back long. Okay, everyone but Kathy has maybe had something. Yeah, that one, some questions are hard, some are not. Humility is foundational. It's why Jesus makes this point. There's various things you can build on that, but humility, if you get that, it is going to impact every relationship we have for the better. This applies to every one of us, wherever we are in life. And so let's look and see what Jesus says here. Matthew chapter 20, starting at verse 1, he begins with a parable. He says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard." Now, early in the morning, that's 6 o'clock in the morning, when a work day would start. A denarius was an average day's wage. And so here's a person, and these were day laborers. He went and he found them, waiting for work, and, these weren't his regular guys. That's when we went out and hired them. So he gets them at 6 in the morning. Well, about 9 in the morning, he went out, and he saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, then the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon, so they worked 1 hour, came and each received a denarius, a full day's wage. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, Am I not being unfair to you, friend? Did you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Again, this chapter is all about the unexpected, and it kicks off with something that's just completely unexpected here. Here's this parable, and you certainly see what happens, this idea of getting paid the same, even though they were hired and worked hugely different amounts, to those workers who were hired first. Well, they were planning on it. They saw those people hired an hour ago, and they got an denarius. They're thinking, well, definitely, I have to be getting more. And what they got wasn't at all what they expected. And I think, if we're honest, it's not what I would expect either. I mean, I read that, and there's probably like, okay, I'd be chiming up saying, listen, yeah, they worked 1 hour. I worked 12. My sense of fairness, I'd have a hard time not saying something. I think it strikes all of us as this isn't the way it should be. This is totally unexpected, and it sets the tone for the rest of this chapter. And even the last verse there, so the last will be first and the first will be last. That's not what we expect. Are you ever standing in line anywhere and someone comes and takes the people at the end? It's like, we'll start with you and let you in first and just go reverse order. No, that doesn't happen. And everybody in the front would be upset if it did. It'd be just like this. We don't expect this. It is so out of the ordinary for us. Well, verse 17, then Jesus was going up to Jerusalem. On the way, he took the 12 aside, the 12 inner disciples, closest disciples, and said to them, we're going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles, and to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life. What's unexpected here? And this is one of those places where we have to, again, put ourselves in their shoes, because for us, there's nothing unexpected. Well, we know Jesus is going to die. We've heard the story once or twice. Maybe we've seen the movie. Again, we know what's going to happen. And even we might look and say, well, for them, he's told them twice now. This is the third time that, they should have. Yeah, but he's undoing years and years and years of this teaching that was ingrained. They believe Jesus is the Messiah, and they believe the Messiah is going to come and set up his physical kingdom. In their day and age, he's going to overthrow, he's going to kick out Rome. And so for Jesus to say this, it's still unexpected. And he also adds a detail which is totally unexpected, which again for us is just, well, of course. He says there, Jesus is going to be mocked and flogged and crucified. He hadn't told them that yet before. And again, for us, it's like, okay, that's the way you're going to die. For them, that was huge. That was huge to say he's going to be crucified. He's not just going to die. He told them that at least a couple times already. It's been recorded. He tells them, I'm going to be crucified. Crucifixion was different. Again, the Jews at times would put people to death. They'd stone them. The Romans at times would put people to death. If you were a Roman citizen, you could not be crucified. It was such an extreme, torturous form of death. They wouldn't even inflict it upon their citizens. They'd behead them. This was over and above. And again, we know the story. Oh, yeah, crucified. No, this was unexpected for Jesus to add that detail there. Then go on, it continues, verse 20, the mother of Zebedee's sons, and so this would be James and John. John, the author of the Gospel of John, some of the epistles, the book of Revelation, and his brother James. This mother came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. What is it you want, he asked. She said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right, and the other at your left in the kingdom. You don't know what you are asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I am going to drink? Now, the cup, that word, again, from the Old Testament, they knew what that meant. It was a word that meant, he's not talking some literal, hey, yeah, can you have it? No, it meant judgment. It meant the wrath of God. It was negative, and they knew that. Well, they answer, we can. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup. It's going to happen to John. James is going to be the first apostle who's put to death. You will indeed drink from it, but to set it my right or left, that's not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared by my Father. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. So the other 10 disciples heard what they had done. Jesus called them all together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Again, the unexpected element here. Being a servant, being a slave, that was not the normal path to success. Kids didn't go to school and go to their guidance counselor. What do you want? Well, I want to be a servant because I think that's going to get me the most in life. I really think I can make a lot of myself. No, servants were servants. That's why they called them servants. You didn't want that job. It was the low job. You were below someone else. And a slave even more so. There weren't as many slaves in the Jewish world at this time, but they were very familiar with them in the Roman, the Greek world. These were the lowest people. And here's Jesus saying, you want to be first? Be a servant. Be a slave. Choose to do it. Those people didn't choose it either. It wasn't like, again, this is my choice. I'd really like to be a servant. No, he's saying, but you need to choose. You need to act that way on purpose, to be first, to be great. You got to be kidding, Jesus. That makes absolutely no sense. Look what he talks about. The rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Again, whenever a Gentile authority person, an official, someone who's great in the eyes of everyone else, that was their nature. That's how they operated. They lorded it over others. In the ancient world, humility was a vice. Today we realize it's a good thing and we may be struggling. I know I should be more humble. They didn't even try. No, I can't be humble. That's wrong. That's bad. That's weak. That humility was a vice, not a virtue. They didn't even try to be humble. This was so radically different from what they knew. Well, then verse 29, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting at the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. Jesus stopped and called them. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. Lord, they answered, we want our sight. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and they followed him. All right, so what's the unexpected element here? What's the unexpected element? First, for the crowd. I think for the crowd, it was this idea of the Messiah stopping, stooping on his way to Jerusalem. Remember that? I said it last week, and it also came up this week, chapter 19. He's come from Galilee in the north, where he'd gotten away from Jerusalem, away from some of the pressure there, and most of the Jewish leaders who were against him, certainly the heart of that. Well, now he's coming back down, and he's coming at Passover. It's the time. People are expecting him to declare his messiahship, to be exalted as the Messiah. That's what all the crowds are expecting. And that's what they have on their mind. And so, Jesus, how can you stop? This is the most, we've been waiting for this for hundreds, for thousands of years. Come on, don't stop for them. It's not important. They couldn't believe he would stop and do that. To us, I think there's a little bit of a difference, especially before knowing that. To me, I read this and there was like a wait a minute moment. In the passage, I say there's usually one, maybe more. You could definitely say that the workers getting paid the same would be a wait a minute moment. This was to me too. I looked at these people and I'm like, really? What's the big deal? How long would it really take for Jesus to heal this guy, these two guys? It says immediately. It didn't take them any time. And what a difference would it make in these guys' lives? Again, remind ourselves. No one wants to be blind at any time in history. I wouldn't want to be blind now, but if I was blind now, it'd be a lot easier than being blind 2,000 years ago. And there's things you could still do today. You can get jobs, you can get around. They depended totally on others. This would radically alter and change, transform their lives, and the crowd is, no, come on, shut up. Jesus doesn't have time to change your life, to stop for a minute, literally. He's on the way down there to Jerusalem. That was the unexpected element to me. It's like, is it that big a deal to wait a minute? But that's what they did. You look through the book of Matthew, unexpected seems to be the theme all the way through the book. You look through there, and it begins with, and again, sometimes we're so used to it, we forget. But Jesus is born, and where's he born? There's no room for him in the end. He's born, he's placed in a manger. He's born to a poor family. Again, stop and realize, if you had to make up a story, let me see, I'm going to have the Son of God coming down to earth. Like, oh man, he needs to be a king. He needs to have the best situation. That's not what happened to him. You continue on through there, just the fact that he was the Son of God. Don't forget, that was unexpected to them. They'd been waiting for the Messiah for hundreds, thousands of years. They did not expect him to be the Son of God. They in their mind, again, it's what set the Jews apart. There is one God. And there still is. Jesus, it wasn't a second one, but to have the Father and the Son, they weren't counting on that. That was unexpected. And then as wild as that is, think what a radical change that would be. And again, if you're ever talking with people also, and trying to convince them about the Bible, that's a very strong point. Again, if Jesus had appeared to the Greeks, the Romans, said, I'm a God, there's like, fine, okay, put your picture up with everyone else. We got tons of them. But to appear to the Jews and them to accept him, that required some real proof. Use that as you're talking with someone and just put them in that situation. That required a tremendous amount of proof for a Jew to say, you are God in the flesh. And as tough as that was, it was even harder for them to accept the unexpected fact that the Messiah was going to die. You remember when Jesus asked the disciples, who do the people say I am? And who do you say I am? Peter, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He didn't totally understand it, but he's like, okay, I've added that to my worldview. Somehow there's God the Father and there's you. Don't understand it, but I'm going to radically change my worldview. And then a little while later, Jesus says, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. He's like, no, that one I can't add in. That one cannot be changed. That's just too big. Like really, eunuchs. God walking on earth, that one's okay, but the Messiah dying, that's too much. It was for them. That was radically unexpected. The whole idea of the kingdom that he brought. They were expecting, they just knew there is going to be a kingdom. It's going to be physical. The Messiah is going to sit on the throne. He's going to kick out Rome. That is just a given. And for him to come and be talking about the spiritual kingdom, that was so unexpected. The Sermon on the Mount. What he did is, you have heard it was said, but I tell you. In other words, let me tell you something different, something you didn't expect me to say right now. And even this one that we've seen over and over, or last two times here, the first will be last, the last will be first. That's unexpected. That's not the way things work. This whole theme that goes throughout Matthew, and really, it's just God's nature in general. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. God is speaking. He says, for your thoughts, you people, your thoughts are not my thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I'm different. I do things differently. I do things you don't expect. The point that we need to get here when it comes to this general lesson, if our approach, and I put it on your handout there, if our approach to life, and by that I mean the situations we face, the people we interact with, if our approach to life is not radically different than the world's approach, not radically different than our natural inclination, our sinful inclination, then we are missing it. That's like the general litmus test. You want to know, am I doing God's will? Well, are you doing something that's radically different than a person who doesn't believe in God? Chances are you're doing his will then. It should make that big of a difference. Matter of fact, I'm starting to think a theme for all of Matthew, this seems to be it. God works in unexpected ways. And it's why I think Matthew fits our culture so much, because we have these expectations. God, we want you, but here's what we want you to do. That's just what they were doing then. It's what we're doing now. We're going to see it in chapter 21. Their expectations versus Jesus. This is just foundational. If we believe there is a God, a creator, sustainer, redeemer, my life has to be radically different than someone who doesn't. Or it just makes no sense. That is the line that separates you. You talk about worldviews. You can separate them into two. You believe in God or you don't. That is the main difference between a worldview. And certainly as Christians, ours should be different. Well, then you have that general lesson of God does things unexpectedly. God expects things we don't desire or expect. Well, then there's a specific lesson that Jesus has been talking about. And again, I said it culminates here. It's this idea that kingdom greatness, and not just some people in the kingdom, not just some Christians, some disciples, all disciples. Kingdom greatness comes from humility. That's different. And today it adds this point, and humility includes sacrifice. Kingdom greatness, to be a disciple, a great disciple, and Jesus says all disciples are supposed to be great. I don't want the non-great and the great ones. If you're a disciple, this is what you're to be like. You're to be humble to the point of sacrifice. And really that's what chapter 20 then teaches us about that as well. Each of these general unexpected things teaches us something about sacrifice. The parable of the workers. What did they need to sacrifice? Seems like the sense of what I deserve. Those first workers hired, they worked 12 hours. Did they deserve probably more than the person who worked one? Yeah, they really did. The point of this parable, don't go so far. The point of this parable is it is different than you expect. Don't try to make it, oh, well, no, it shouldn't be. No, that's the point. They do deserve, if you're going by different. God doesn't do things the way we think. We don't get what we deserve. We have to be willing to give up what we deserve, because that really is a thing that will undermine putting others first. The last time you had trouble putting someone else first, I guarantee you it's probably a part, well, no, I shouldn't have to do that. I deserve to be. I'm the one that it's going to undermine putting others first, or really putting them at all. It's not just first, just considering them at all. Stop and think about this parable. These people were day laborers. They were the poorest of the poor. I remember in college one summer, I didn't have a job, my friend didn't have a job, so we went down to this place that hired day laborers. And we walk in this room, and oh man, it's like out of a movie, smoky, dark, and there's this huge desk where the one person who hires you out is sitting, and there's everyone else all around the edges. I'm pretty sure we were the only two Bible college students there that day. And we might have been the only two college students there that day. I'm not sure. These were not people who had a huge savings. They're like, hey, I know what I'll do. I'll go do some day labor today. This was all they had, and it's the same thing in Jesus' day. They didn't have a savings account. If they didn't get money this day, they didn't eat that day. Their families didn't eat that day. But these other workers are begrudging them. Like, why'd you get a denarius? I should have gotten more. We have to give up what we deserve. And again, the key point of this parable seems to be, what we think and expect about the kingdom and discipleship and humility is often wrong. At best, it's incomplete. And the rest of the chapter goes on to give those details. What Jesus' third prediction of his death. What's this teach us about sacrifice? Well, just the very fact, it's his third prediction. His first time he predicted it, you remember Peter? No way, God. You can't die. Second time he predicts it, it says the disciples were grieved. They didn't argue, but they didn't like it. Well, what about this third time? What's it at? Chances are this wasn't just the third time he'd said it. He probably said it other times. Why does Matthew include it right here? There's always a reason. Ask that question. Why does he include it here? What does this one add that the others didn't add? And you remember I said, one, it adds the fact he's going to be handed over to Gentiles. Prior to this, didn't say anything about Gentiles. The Romans, up to this point, Romans didn't care about Jesus. It was all him and the Jews. So he's adding a detail. I'm going to be handed over to the Gentiles. And why is that important? Because I'm going to be crucified. The Jews can't crucify someone. Only the Romans could crucify someone. Again, the Jews weren't supposed to put anyone to death under Roman authority, but every once in a while there'd be a riot and they'd stone someone, and the Romans might overlook that. But they definitely could not crucify someone. So Jesus said, I'm going to be handed over to the Gentiles. I'm going to be crucified. And again, what's that tell us about sacrifice? Crucifixion was viewed just entirely differently. We talk about the old rugged cross, we sing about it, and we've got to stop and realize, and I think we know that's where Jesus was put to death, but even realize then, of the ways to be put to death, no one chose crucifixion. You really, I'd rather not be executed, but no one chose crucifixion. That's what Paul is saying in Philippians 2:8, when he says, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. Well, first of all, just being found in appearance as a man was Jesus humbling himself. He was God and came to earth. But then he says he humbled himself by being obedient to death. Again, write the story of God coming to earth. It doesn't automatically end in his dying. And even then, okay, if he's going to die, he's going to live a ripe old age. He's going to be, things are going well. No, this is so different, so unexpected, and so sacrificial. He is going to submit to being put to death. And then he adds this line, even death on a cross. And to his readers, Paul knew what that meant. They're like, oh man, that is so far above. For the Romans, it was so far, again, they would not put to death by crucifixion a Roman citizen. It was just too horrific of a death. They would last for days on the cross. The only reason Jesus didn't is because all he suffered. The only reason the two thieves didn't is because they broke their legs. And even the Jews, there's this verse that says, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. There was something in the whole Jewish mindset that said, that's different. It's wrong. It's bad. I never would want to be killed that way. Jesus, the point here, first of all, humility involves sacrifice. But the point that this shows us, there's no limit to that sacrifice. We can't draw a line. Jesus didn't draw a line. Well, I'll go to earth, but I better have some fine accommodations. Yeah, I'll go to earth, but let me just transfer up to heaven without dying at all. I'll die, but make it be peaceful at an old age. I'll be put to death, but not crucified. There was no limit to what Jesus did. Sacrifice has no limits. And then what about this request for the chief positions? Think about it. All Jesus talked about dying prior to this, and here's these disciples. They still have a physical idea of the kingdom. Jesus said, I'm going to Jerusalem to be put to death. Oh, that's nice, Jesus. Hey, when your kingdom gets set up, can we have the seats on the right and left of you? Whatever they thought, again, because they argued at first, they were grieved the next time. Somehow they got he was going to die, but they didn't get just what it meant. And you see that afterward, after he resurrects, Acts 1. Jesus, are you going to set up the kingdom now? This really freaked us out, this whole dying thing. They can't get it out of their mind. So they're still thinking about the kingdom and seats and thrones and all this focus that he's had on being humble. And what did James and John, through their mother and others, passages show they were involved as well. They were active. They still want to be in the chief places. It doesn't matter what Jesus said about being humble for so long. And I think the point here is that human sinful nature and ideas that run counter to sacrifice are deeply ingrained. Don't think that you're going to hear it today, or maybe you've been here for the past 3 weeks, and so you've heard about humility 3 weeks in a row. You should really have this down, right? I mean, check it off your list and move on. No. This is showing, this is so deep-seated, so ingrained. We can hear something so clear. and still just in one ear, out the other. Yeah, I know what you mean, and then just go on with what we're thinking and act our same old way. And Jesus adds this detail. He says, I'm going to give my life. Again, there's no limit. And in the last part, Jesus healing these two blind men. Why did the crowd, did you stop and think, why did the crowd rebuke him? They loved the miracles before, didn't they? Like, Jesus couldn't get the crowds away from him fast enough if he was doing miracles. Well, why are they saying to these guys now, shut up? Well, because before Jesus had crowds of people who needed healing, and they hadn't seen the healing before. That was the focus. The crowds were there to be healed. This crowd wasn't there to be healed. This crowd was traveling on their way down to Jerusalem for the Passover. And they expected Jesus to be exalted as the Messiah. And you know what else was different? This crowd didn't need to be healed. People in the crowd didn't need anything. There's these two blind men that did. Well, so? But if Jesus stops, that's no benefit to us. We're on our way to Jerusalem. Our Messiah is about to be exalted. Shut up, guys. Deal with your life. We don't want to take a minute to help you. Oh. There's no benefit. There's no reason for it. Jesus is about to die. That's what I see too, this contrast where Jesus has just said, the Son of Man has came to give his life a ransom for many, and the very next thing, Jesus says, I've come to die, and the crowd says, we can't even stop. I've come to earth, and I'm going to die for everyone, and the crowd says, yeah, but we can't stop a minute for these two guys. What a contrast. And that's what Jesus says, just as the Son of Man, he didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many, for other people. The point here, sacrifice is for others. It's not for ourselves. That's a key element of sacrifice. I'm not looking to what can I get out of this sacrifice. I'm looking for you. If I'm sacrificing, it's for you. It's not for me. Or it's not sacrifice. And even verse 34 of the blind man says, Jesus had compassion on them. Sacrifice has an element of compassion, and compassion by its very nature is focused on other people. I'm not compassionate to myself. If I'm compassionate, I'm compassionate to someone else. Jesus was. They weren't. Putting others first requires true sacrifice. That is fundamental to the Christian life. But I think we'd all admit it's fundamentally difficult, isn't it? It was difficult for the disciples. Look at them. They're not exactly coming off great here. It starts off with this parable. And here's the thing about parables. You have to be careful not to press them too far. Some people read parables and they want to find every little detail and make a parallel, and there's allegorize. And I remember once that I was in a class in seminary and we were looking at the parable of the prodigal son. And we were just starting to talk about it, and people were asking all these questions, and one of them was, that we got on was, why did the father give him the money, his inheritance, in advance in the first place? All these things. Well, he did it. Well, maybe he thought, he'd love him, maybe he'd do this, maybe do that. And after like 10 minutes, I raised my hand, and I'm like, if he didn't, there wouldn't have been a parable. Could you read that? The son came to his father and asked for the inheritance. His father said no. Okay, next. There'd be nothing to get. Sometimes you just got to look. It's the parable. Jesus needs it. You look at this guy here, and I was reading commentaries. Well, why did he come at different times of the day? Well, maybe his harvest, he realized how urgent it was to get the harvest in. No, Jesus just needed him to come at different times of the day. Definitely you can get, caught up and tripped up if you look at grace, because here's these guys, they're working for what they get. Don't take every detail of the parable. What is clear? We talked about this on Tuesday night. You look at a passage. What is clear? Well, it's clear in this passage, first of all, it's very unexpected what the master does. That is the real lesson. The master, God, does things in the way we don't expect. But you know what's also clear? It starts out and it says, for the kingdom of heaven is like. Why do you say for the kingdom of heaven? He's tying it back into something. This is connecting it to what we've seen. And really, it goes back to that first question, who's the greatest? It goes back to the idea of being humble. And certainly the rich young ruler who came and asked, what must I do? What good thing do I need to do to get eternal life? But then the real thing it's tied to is Peter. You remember after the rich young ruler, Jesus says, go and sell everything. You'll have eternal life. And he goes away. And you remember what Peter said? Look up there, chapter 19, verse 27. Peter answered him, talk to Jesus, We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us? Oh, Jesus told this guy, sell everything, you get eternal life. And Peter's like, hey, we did that. Jesus, we sold it. We left everything. What do we get? He's basically saying, Jesus, we put others first. We've sacrificed. Had they really, though? Based on what we just saw about sacrifice, had the disciples really sacrificed? What they did, again, is Peter is their spokesman, and we assume the rest of them too, they didn't do it for others. I thought about this week. A lot of times we don't sacrifice, we barter. Sacrifice is I do something without expecting anything back. Barter is I do something with something. I'm going to get something back for that. Matter of fact, I do this because I think it's worth that from you. How many times do we do that? To other people or to God. God, I'm doing this, and some part of us, wow, God should really like that. I should really get something good out of this. We don't sacrifice, we barter. And again, it goes back to that idea that they need to give up in the parable because why? I think I deserve it. Well, I did this, I deserve. I did this because I think I deserve, because I wanted to deserve. I wanted to get something. And there's no compassion. This is the third time it talks about Jesus showing compassion, and every other time it's making a contrast. The other people weren't. 2 of those 3 times previous, it was the disciples that weren't. They didn't have compassion. They weren't focused on other people. And definitely their sacrifice, quote unquote, it had limits. They had things they weren't going to. What happened to the other 10 when James and John asked for the prime seats? The other 10? They got indignant. Like, come on, I'm not letting you get the inside track on the chief seats. And what do we see later at the Last Supper? Jesus has to wash their feet. Why? Ain't one of those disciples was going to get down and wash the other's feet. No, that's going too far. Their sacrifice had limits. Their version was not really different from the world's. It wasn't different from natural inclination, from sinful inclination. And the real question, of course, to ask then is, what about ours? If our approach to life and people is not radically different than the world's and our natural inclination, then we're missing it. We're missing the big picture, what God wants us to get. Again, it's true about Christianity in general, but think about sacrifice. And I really thought about that this week. I thought, you know what? I don't remember the last time I've sacrificed. I can remember a lot of times I've bartered. That I've done something and I thought, wow, this should get me this. I do this and here's what should come of it. Sometimes to other people, to my wife, my kids, people around me. Sometimes to God. God, I've got this new lesson. Wow, we've been going through Matthew. This is so cool. I've seen it. I'm getting it. This should turn out pretty well. Should be something coming along down the pike any time now. And it's not always that, at the forefront, but there is that thought. I can't escape it. It's human nature. This is what I should get. I don't sacrifice very often. I barter a lot. What about you? Do you sacrifice or do you barter? Yeah, I'll do this thing. I'll give up. I'll put it aside. Looks like sacrifice, but somewhere in our mind, at the front or the back, this ought to get me something. Or if it doesn't, later on, when something doesn't happen, oh, come on, I did this for you. Well, then if I'm bringing it up, I didn't sacrifice for you. I did something for you, yeah, but I'm bringing it up now like, okay, now you should give me this. I deserve it. So that wasn't sacrifice. Wow. I've been quoting parts of Philippians 2. I want you to make sure it's on your handout. Read this along with me as we go. You don't need to read it out loud, but follow along. This is sacrifice. This is our standard. Paul writes, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if it means anything to you to be a Christian, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, again, if these things, being a Christian means anything to you, then make my joy complete by being like-minded with each other, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind, having unity with each other in the church. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Selfish ambition, I want to get something from what I'm doing. Vain conceit, I deserve to get something. Rather, in humility, Value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. In case you don't get it, Paul says, let me give you a picture of what this looks like. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, he is fully God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. The NIV sometimes interprets this, they are interpreting it. It means something to be grasped, to be held on to. But I think they've gotten the right point. They've interpreted it in the right way. Jesus, he didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. What can I get out of being the Son of God? No, what can I do for you? Because I'm the Son of God and you can't do it on your own. You can't do it, but I can, and that's what I want to do. Rather, verse 7, he made himself nothing. Not just he lowered himself a little bit. He made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness. And again, we're like, come on, God, some of this human likeness isn't all that bad. It was better 10 years ago, but we're talking about God coming to earth and taking on human likeness. Wow. That's how far we should go. No, it's not, because then, verse 8, and being found in appearance as a man, if that wasn't bad enough, he humbled himself by being obedient to death, and that death was execution, even death on a cross. And the next time we think about sacrifice, next time we think about being humble, putting others first, these are the verses that need to be in our mind. This is the bar. It's like the Sermon on the Mount. You know, Jesus said, be perfect what? You know, a little better than your neighbor's perfect. Be perfect what? Well, a little better than you maybe were last year. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That's the bar. Will we ever be perfect like that? No. But compare yourself to that. Don't compare yourself to someone else. Don't compare yourself to you a while ago. Compare yourself to God. Well, same thing when it comes to being humble and sacrificing. Compare yourself to Philippians 2. Well, just about every week I look and like, what's the root problem? Seems like, okay, we can get all this, but there's something, and I think it's just this, what we've sort of been seeing, it's this fundamental trait. And so because this trait that's in us, it's such basic, key to our nature, there's fundamental opposition to it. God, I can't give this up. I can't put others first. I can't sacrifice. It is so hard to do. It's so contrary to everything in the world. It's so contrary to everything that my inner human sinful nature says I want to do. It just doesn't seem like this is best for me to sacrifice. You know, at best you'll see people and they'll weigh the sacrifice. Is it worth it? Is it too much? That's my problem. This just goes contrary to everything about me. And so what's the key to overcoming the root problem? Well, one thing I can tell you it isn't. Being told that you need to be humble and need to put others first and need to sacrifice, just being told that ain't going to do it. That may do it for a little bit. I've seen, like we were like really convicted there for a few moments. If I could have got you right then maybe, I'll sacrifice anything right now. But I don't know about you, it's already fading for me. If it's just being told, here's what you ought to do, external motivation, it won't work. It won't last. It has to be from the inside. It has to be from our heart. It has to be from focusing on God. And that's where it came alive, what we've been seeing in Matthew. Where does it start? It starts with this focus on worship. You need to see God. You need to realize and declare and live out the worth of God, the worthship of God. Realize who He is. Realize you can trust His control. You can trust His love. And because of that, what do we see next? This whole several chapters on commitment. God, I sign a blank sheet to you. I commit to you because you are God and I'm not. I can trust you completely. I commit. I have this total faith, this surrender, this reliance. And then the most specific thing as we get here, the next thing, God's saying, all right, then be humble. You say, I'm God and you're not. I call the shots. You signed a blank sheet. You say you can trust me. Be humble. Sacrifice. Put others first to the point of sacrifice. Not because I'm telling you to, but because it's just the right thing. It's the natural thing when you realize there is a God and I'm not Him. When you make a commitment to God that's truly He's deserving of, a full-fledged blank sheet commitment, Be humble. Let it flow out of that. When you see what Jesus did to even give you a chance to know who God is and spend a life and eternity with him, be humble. What do I need to do now? I'm like, okay, I don't know. That's pretty big. The only thing I could think of is I need to ask, how do I truly sacrifice in this situation and have a new frame of reference? No limits, no thought of, well, I deserve this. Well, if I do this, maybe I'll get this. I need to approach situations. How do I truly sacrifice? How do I truly put someone else first and not try to get something out of it? Change your mindset. It is be transformed how? By the renewing of your mind. We've got to view it different. And that's what I want us to see. What will it look like? Well, start to live it out. And I didn't put anything there at first. I want us to answer that question. What will it look like in our relationships? In our witness to people, our impact. And if you have another question, if there's something that came to mind, bring that up too. But I definitely want us, because I think sometimes it helps if I'm the one that says it. What will my relationship with my wife look like? My kids, my friends, my family, my coworkers, my church, family. What will it look like if I truly sacrifice? How will that affect my witness to people who aren't Christians? What would that do to that? And the impact of the church, if we could all do that our church, the church on the world, if we truly were humble and put other people first and sacrificed. Well, how would that change the way people think about the church? How would that change what the church is able to do today? How it's able to impact or not?